Hi, everyone. My name is Georgia Oteri. I'm a co host of the Humans and Wildlife Show. And with me today, as always, is my co host, Christian Zase. Christian, what are we going to talk about today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is our 18th episode. Welcome to the Humans and Wildlife Show, and welcome to my co host, also Georgia Oteri.
Yeah.
So, today it's going to be quite exciting. Well, Georgia, it's more your area we're going to talk about. What is it going to be?
Yes, yeah. So we're going to talk about rock climbing and wildlife, the intersection. Yeah, I asked you what we were going to talk about. You were supposed to ask me. I messed it up. It happens. Yeah, so I'm a rock climber though, and
You are.
um, and I like animals, and we have this show. So we decided that we would talk about the intersection of those two things. So like the animals that live on the cliffs, and also more so like the interaction between climbers and the animals. So just like any outdoor recreation activity, there's the potential for conflict, but there's also a lot of potential for beneficial interactions where people are helping to facilitate conservation efforts. So we're going to talk about both of those things today.
That's a very interesting subject because, Georgia, the last encounter I had with cliffs actually was not as a climber because I'm definitely not a climber. Um, but that was in July when we had peregrine falcons at the mine site, and that was a big story. And I was so much aware of wildlife and cliffs, especially with peregrine falcons there. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how you can explain. How you actually get up there. Maybe we should start that way. I mean, what does one? How does why should one even become a climber? What made you become a climber, Georgia?
Yeah, well, I definitely wouldn't say, oh, someone should become a climber, but if it's something that, is intriguing to you, it's actually, I think, a sport where I like it because it's a thinking sport. There's no fast movements for the most part. I consider myself extremely clumsy. And so like if I fall, I'm going to like need stitches or break a bone or something just because I'm going to fall like clumsily. But in climbing, you have a rope, and if you fall, it's often kind of into the ground is far away, so it's in a sense hard to hurt yourself, right? Because the rope is probably going to catch you before you hit the ground, or at least that's how it's supposed to work. So yeah, like the styles of climbing also become important when we think about like how they're impacting the animals and nature.
Mm.
So one style is called bouldering, and that's when you actually climb very close to the ground, and you're close enough that if you fall off, you hopefully won't get hurt that much. And I have actually one of the clips is of me bouldering, so I'll just pull that up very, very quickly. Um, so this is, we can talk more about this one later, so we won't talk about it too much now. But you can see like it's literally a big boulder. That's it. So I'm just going to climb up that thing, and there's no ropes. And, if I fall in this case, I'm probably going to fall into the water. And it's more about just the experience of figuring out how to get up a particular little stretch of rock. It's kind of, I often say rock climbing is like puzzle solving with your body, like trying to figure out what position, how do I move myself to get up this thing.
Do
And
you never
then
get scared?
I get scared, but that's
Hmm.
also part of what I like about climbing is that it's good mental training. So you're training your mind to manage stress in some sense, and you're training yourself to think clearly even when you're nervous. And I like those aspects of it as well. But I'm not one of those people that's really afraid of heights or anything like that. So it might be a little bit easier for me in a sense.
Yeah, I agree here, by the way, with Diana. Hi, Diana, who says, I like my feet on the ground. I agree. That's what gravity's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
meant for that.
yeah, someone asked me once, he goes, don't you have dreams about falling? And I was like, no, I don't. I've never dreamed of falling, actually. And then I thought of it later. I was like, what is always happening in my nightmares? I'm getting chased by something. And so maybe the climbing is like, oh, it's something where I think it's safer if you climb up high. Nothing can get you up there. So maybe we're all afraid of different things, I guess, is the
Yeah, and
takeaway.
Frankman is bringing up something I was just thinking about because I mean you were right next to the ocean there, or in the ocean actually. It says, "I imagine climbing on wet rocks extra dangerous." Well, I would think so, right?
Yeah, definitely. And those rocks weren't actually that wet. Um, but because the ocean like spray just wasn't reaching that high. But there's definitely environmental risks to take into account. And I mean, if you're concerned about preserving an area, it's actually not good for the rock to climb on them when they're wet. The rocks are more easily to break apart sometimes. Like so, depending on the type of rock, if it rains or something, it's you don't want to climb for several days to preserve the cliff face for future climbers and for animals. Um, but we talked about one style of climbing, bouldering. There's a second style called sport climbing, which you showed at the beginning in our introductory
Okay.
video, Christian, if you want to bring up that clip again.
Let me find it one
Yeah.
second. Where was this brave girl climbing, right? So
Yeah.
where was she? Ah, I think that was here. Let's see. There she is, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Hmm.
sport climbing is a really popular style of climbing. Um, and you're going to see it. You're going to see this moment here where she reaches up with this piece of metal and hooks it onto something. So she's clipping into a piece of metal that's permanently embedded in the rock. Um, and that's one of the reasons that it's so popular is because you get to climb this big, tall thing and periodically clip into these security points along the rock, these bolts. And so sport climbing is popular for that reason. You get to do these really cool big climbs with pretty low risk. She's tied into a rope. The rope is hanging below her right now, but you can't really see it. Um,
So
but
Georgia, is that most? I have absolutely no idea. All I read is that in the United States there are about 4 point something million climbers. Climbing at least once a year, which is an amazing number. Are these outdoor climbers mainly going along popular routes which have these hooks in them, or you know?
yeah, I honestly, I don't know how they came up with the number, but it might even include people that only climb at indoor climbing gyms. So these
Oh,
people
right.
might not be climbing outside at all. Um, and yeah, so I don't know. And a lot of people, if they're transitioning from like an indoor climbing gym to outside climbing, they're going to be either bouldering or sport climbing, doing one of these two videos that I showed. But there's a third style of climbing, like the traditional style or trad climbing, and I think you had a clip on that too.
Let's see if I can find it. Which one was that, George?
It's the one where he's like
Oh yeah,
putting the
you
toes
mean the
together.
one with this guy there? This one? No.
Yeah, this one. So
Yeah.
like
Okay.
instead of these sort of semi-permanent like anchor points in the rock, he is just putting in this gear that like uses friction to hold itself in. And so he's going to take that out once he's done with the climb, and there's going to be nothing left. So
Uh,
fewer people do this style of climbing because it requires more training. You have to know about, figuring out what type of gear to place in the hole and where to place it so that it's safe, so that even if you fall, it's not going to yank out by accident. Um, and so, Christian, you mentioned that you'd seen some studies on the impacts of rock climbing on wildlife. And
yes.
um, I also did some research into this, and in fact, I had a friend who researched the impact of rock climbing on bats. So a lot of animals like bats really like to use those crevices in the rock. Like a lot
Hmm.
of bats might be hanging out in there.
Hmm.
And my friend found that basically the more popular the route was, the more people were on it, the fewer bats there were. Like the number of species of bats went down. And she found that I believe part of her findings too were that routes that were this style of rock climbing that we used like the traditional style had more
Hmm.
bats, just because fewer people were climbing them actually. But it turned out to be a little bit better for the animals, basically.
Yes, that was interesting. I was amazed when I read this study, and I really, I just read it because I had no idea about it. In general, the consensus seems to be that people who are doing rock climbing are more conscious of wildlife and also obviously the flora and fauna around them. So that's the good news. It's like they say what they did find was if they looked at the diversity of species, and this was a study from Boulder, Colorado. I can put the link in there of a scientific study. They actually did it for studying um, that for outdoor recreation, because they have to know how to deal with with the increasing number of recreation in all areas, right, that we're doing. And what they found was it very much also depends on what, where the rock is facing. For example, north facing rocks, north facing
Mhm.
walls and east facing walls are not that popular, and also not very popular among wildlife. Okay, so the diversity is much less. But west and south facing, at least if you're on the northern part of the hemisphere, is much more popular, and that's also where more climbers would be. So the diversity would go down. For example, you would never find a peregrine falcon in along a main main route, a popular route. You would find them elsewhere in the less popular ones. However, the species that were present, uh, typically, well, swallows or what was swifts and so on, they would prevail there also in large numbers. So they obviously got used to humans and were dealing. So it's not that the number there didn't go down. It's just the diversity. That's my understanding.
Yeah. Um, so I want to like before as we're talking about all these like conservation implications and efforts, I want to give people maybe a little bit more of an idea of a concrete idea for how it is that climbers are encountering wildlife.
Yes. Oh, do
So
that. Sure.
yeah, I'll just share a few clips here to set the scene. So this is from a climb I did this summer in Arizona. So it's me and my climbing partner standing on top of this
Oh
basically
my goodness.
big rock pillar
You've got to
that
be
we
out of your
climbed.
mind, Georgia. Sorry.
No, I mean it was a beautiful, beautiful climb, but we also had some beautiful wildlife encounters during this climb. And so that's kind of to set the scene, but then can get a little bit closer here. I'm going to kind of zoom in set by set with a series of videos here. So this is another shot from that climb, and you can see there's a big crack in between us in the rock going down, right? That's sort of like
Mostly,
where
I
the
see
rock
that
almost
you
splits.
look so relaxed, which I can't understand.
Well, I'm tied in. I'm tied into some, anchors at the top, so I'd probably only fall a few feet if I fell. But like that crack in between us had a bunch of bats in it, like a bunch of
Really?
bats. It was so cool. And I'm going to share the final video clip where we actually get to hear the bats. And it was kind of funny because as I was coming up to the top of the climb, I heard them all in there squeaking. And I was like, oh no, these bats are upset. Like, maybe I'm not going to be able to finish the climb because they're so mad, and like I don't want to disturb them and have them all fly out and get eaten by hawks immediately. So I kind of debated, like, oh, should I even, like be shoving my hands in here to finish to actually getting to the top of the rock, but we did, and the bats stayed in, and so it was fine. But we can listen for a minute to my climbing partner, Ruman, as he narrates sort of our wildlife experiences that we're having on this climb, including the bats. So we'll just listen for a moment here, a minute.
So we're on top of the totem pole right now. George is drinking some Pedialytes. We have a mess of ropes because we have to drag up the drone.
Wait, get the sound of the bats.
There's some bats in the crack here which are chirping at us.
They're mad.
There's Little Devil Canyon. Here's Prototype, the other tower. And there was a Black Hawk down in the valley there that was coming checking us out. It flew right by the tower a couple times while we were climbing, and it flew by right here. Also, you can kind of see my shadow waving. That's us on the tower. But
That's incredible. Before we even talk about wildlife, can I just ask you, what is easier, to get up or down? Oh, wait, you're muted. Wait, you're muted. I'm just going to unmute you. Wait a second. Okay.
Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, to get down is certainly easier. So you just rappel down, which is basically like you already have your harness on from climbing, right? And so then you just attach yourself to the rope and slide down it basically. Yeah, so especially in this case, it's definitely easier to get down. You're not like trying to climb down. Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay, at least
Mhm.
something's easy.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of a nice, relaxing, like, oh, you like take in the climb and the scenery, and it's all quite beautiful. So, yeah.
Oh, okay, let's get to the wildlife part now. So, was it a little bit difficult to understand? Maybe you could just, verbalize what was going on there.
Yeah, so we climbed to the top of that thing, and then, we showed, like, could you hear the audio okay? Actually, I should ask that.
You have to ask the audience. I'm not quite sure,
Oh,
or the
yeah.
viewers, if they could hear.
Yeah, let us know if you could hear the
Yes,
audio.
they could. Okay,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah,
thank you. Okay, they could. Okay,
great.
that's fine. That's
That's
fine.
good.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the bats you saw, and I talked about quite a bit already, but yeah, you saw that beautiful green valley, and there was a blackhawk just flying back and forth periodically along there, and we saw a peregrine actually as well. It wasn't in the video, but a little while
Really?
later, some of those cliffs that were like next to us, like right the closest rocks, had a peregrine like fly into them, and I don't know if it had a nest back there or what. Um, so that was pretty cool. We did I did take some of that footage with a drone. Someone asked about that, the stuff that's far away from the rock. And we decided to do that because it seemed safe to spite the birds because, well, we hadn't seen the peregrine yet at that point, but also the blackhawk was kind of far away for the most part. Like it was more down by the green part. There is another video I'll share a little bit later where I actually recorded the footage with my drone, but I didn't fly it. I was literally just holding my drone to use it as a video because there were peregrines nesting nearby, and to keep them from being mad, basically. So,
Yes. Interesting. Wow. So, Gentleman Ghost just saying, next clip to Yosemite El Capitan. Is that going to happen? Have you been there?
I haven't been, but that's definitely like the mecca for climbing in the United States and honestly like worldwide. So El Capitan, yeah, is
Capitan, sorry,
in
that's Capitan. Yeah.
Yosemite. No, it's fine.
Capitan.
It's like a very beautiful climbing area, and that gets into what's called big wild climbing, which is similar to the styles of climbing we've seen, but the climbs are long enough that you're actually spending the night on the wall, oftentimes potentially. And some of the routes, so they make tents that you can hang, suspend vertically, and they have a stiff platform, or it's really just more of a ledge. You can use a tent or a ledge and sleep overnight on the cliff face, and then continue your climbing in the morning, basically. So
Well, that's
Christian, your
I
face.
can't imagine sleeping on a ledge because you really have to remember which way to turn, right? If you turn the wrong way, you're gonna
Yeah,
not only dream that you're falling, you're really gonna fall. I never had that one.
you would definitely stay like kind of tied in all night, or secured in some way, so that even if you rolled off, it would be okay. Um,
Oh,
but
that's wonderful! Really amazing. I have big admiration for you, George. Really, that's great.
yeah, I guess
Wow,
since
and
we
no,
oh, go
that
ahead.
was beautiful. I mean, talking about bats and you encountering bats up there. Did you expect that? Did you go because of that, or
No, I
no?
didn't
No.
expect it. I certainly didn't go because of it. I think it's not uncommon for climbers to encounter bats though when they're
Mm.
climbing. In fact, there's even an organization called Climbers for Bat Conservation.
Oh.
I'll put the link. And basically, what they do is, in addition to encouraging people to be friendly towards wildlife and stuff like that while they're climbing, they encourage climbers to report their sightings of bats. That way we can learn more about like which species are using what cracks, and what areas on the cliffs the bats are using and stuff like that. So I'll put a link to their page in the chat. Um, but yeah, so that's an example of how climbers can help collect data about
Mm.
wildlife that is useful for people. Yeah.
Oh.
And then I'll include, because we were talking about the raptors, I'll include
Mhm.
another clip that is also from Arizona. And so this is the example I was just talking a moment ago about where I decided not to fly the drone because there were nesting peregrines nearby, and there was actually a route closure for nesting peregrines. So the birds tend to nest in the same place year after year, and so
Yes, of course, yes.
yeah, so you can look online before you go climbing somewhere and see like, oh yeah, this route you're not allowed to climb it. You're not allowed to climb this area of the rock for these months of the year. And so we were abiding by that. But even so, the peregrines were very upset at us. And so I felt kind of bad because we were climbing a section of rock near the area that was closed down for them, but it wasn't the area that was closed. But even though we were that nearby, they were still upset and like swooping kind of at us and stuff while we were climbing. And so I felt kind of bad because I was like, oh, if I had known that was going to be the reaction, then I would have not climbed that route. You know what I mean?
Sure, sure. But you can be happy it's not an osprey. I mean, ospreys have made the most serious attacks on people. I don't know if you know that, but they're really serious. I was once, and that is nothing. I'm deviating now a little bit from the topic, but I just want to quickly say I was once actually photographing an osprey from the street. I was surprised,
Mhm.
and Mama osprey came straight diving at me, and I had to really
Oh,
duck.
wow.
And they can become, I wouldn't want to be a rock climber being bombarded on top of it by some
Yeah,
raptor.
it was
Oh,
it was very stressful actually. Yeah, because we didn't know. We were like a little bit, worried for the birds, but also a little bit worried for ourselves. And so I'm not sure like what goes into the decision on like how much of the rock to close down for the nesting season and stuff. But I imagine part of it, I'm sure they factor in like how popular the area is. Like if there's tons of people there climbing, maybe they should close off a little bit bigger of the section. That way they don't stress the animals out. But in this area we were in, like you can see there's nobody else around. We didn't see any other climbers the whole day.
so what is your experience, Georgia? I mean, no, I know you're very responsible and probably much more cautious than other people, but did you ever find irresponsible climbers concerning wildlife? Have you ever seen anything like that?
Um, well, yes, I've seen irresponsible climbers that are just, I mean, I think one of the biggest
Mhm.
things that people do that maybe they don't think about is they make a lot of noise when they're at the rock climbing area.
I
So
see.
they'll bring their outdoor speaker, they'll have it turned way up, and I don't think,
Outdoor speaker? Are you serious? Oh
yeah,
my
like a
God.
boombox or something.
Oh, come on.
Yeah,
Really?
and so like I think it's kind of nice to have, oh, it's like a party with your friends, you're all climbing, but I think it's not very respectful of nature and it's not very respectful of other climbers if you're around. Um,
Well, I'm a bit surprised. I thought that's what people come out there is to, especially in climbing, you completely enjoy the wind and nature. That's what I thought. I didn't know there was such a thing.
yeah, no, definitely. And it's kind of, there's different like subcultures within the sport, like, and a
Yeah,
lot of
of
people
course.
that they spend a lot of time in the climbing gym and they only are in the climbing gym for their first, years of climbing maybe. And they're used to being in that environment with a bunch of people around, with music playing through the speakers, and then they kind of like bring that outdoors. Um, and so I think that's one of the biggest things. And I have to admit too, it's a lot of it is about learning. So I think by the time I started climbing, I was old enough to be responsible. But when I was younger, I've been caving since I was like 5 years old, the first time I went caving. And I remember
Right.
like when I was a kid, like high school or middle school, I remember going into caves that I was not supposed to go into. Like I remember like climbing over chain link fences that were
Mhm.
like locked to get to like a cool cave and go explore it. And um in retrospect, I shouldn't have done that. And I know at least one of those caves was closed for bats. It's like closed because they didn't want to like disturb the bats that were potentially using the cave.
So the
So
question from Karen was, how old were you when you first started climbing?
So I was in college when I first started climbing, and I did start climbing in an indoor gym. I think I must have been like 20 or 21, probably 20, I think. And so I did like an indoor rock climbing class actually. That was like a semester long class, and you're supposed to like, go to the climbing gym once a week, and then they took you outside at the end. And so I was lucky too, though, because the people teaching that class like that were like the owners of the climbing gym basically were super responsible, and they were the type of people who they really wanted to be outside. And the climbing gym is sort of like, oh, we can't always get to the cool rock climbing areas that often, and so we have this climbing gym. But like they're the type of people who at heart, like, you know, really wanted to be outside climbing. That would be their preference. And
And and
yeah.
and Georgia, when you climb, are there? I mean, you were saying you were reading these guides, but is it mandatory actually to read them so that you understand which routes are open and not? Because I'm quite sure there wouldn't be signs, right, telling you where you can climb and where not, or how does it work?
Yeah, so you have to look online ahead of time. There's a lot of like information online. There's a
Mhm.
website called like Mountain Project where they have, you know, the names and difficulty of different routes rated, and there will be announcements about whether the route is closed for for whatever reason. Like it might be closed
Mhm.
a certain time of the year. It might have once been an established route, and it might now be closed because it's owned by private property owners and they sold the
Mhm.
land or something, and the new owners aren't don't want people climbing there. So there's a lot of information like that you have to navigate, and so that's part of being a responsible climber is looking up that information ahead of time. I'll stop sharing this video real quick. Sometimes there are signs. I have never seen them in the
Mhm.
wild, but when I was looking up stuff for this
Mhm.
show, I found signs online.
All right, interesting.
Um, so I
Are there
think,
any? I'm just curious about this. You know, how far does the act go there, or the policy? Are there fines if you know if you ignore this, or how does it work? You know.
I think it depends um, on who owns the land. Once again, like
Oh, I see.
if the
Okay.
land is on like, you know, some sort of state or federal
Hmm.
land, um, then you know they can fine you. If it's like a private property owner, I imagine that part of it is that they're just like, oh, you know, they might not let people climb there anymore if you keep breaking the rules. So like, don't do that. You know, don't mess it up for all the other climbers. Um, I did.
And when you get to the top, are you usually exhausted? I'm sorry, I have to ask you all
Oh
that
no,
because I'm
I mean
curious.
that's a reasonable question. Yeah, I'm often tired. I think it depends. That other video, there's an example of a route closure sign that I
Oh
just put up,
yes. Okay.
and that sign, I don't know if you can read it, but it actually says, "Route attention climbers, route closure due to nesting peregrine falcons. The section of the Traps Cliff between and including the routes Laughing Man and V3 is temporarily closed to rock climbing." So that's in a popular climbing area. I guess they might, you know, put up a sign like that to dissuade people. But yeah, am I tired at the top of climbing? Yeah, definitely sometimes, and especially that the video I showed before with my partner narrating when we were at the top of the pole. He was like, "Oh, there's Georgia drinking her Pedialyte." He said at the beginning. I don't know if you could hear it, but that was a rough climb for me because it was 2 pitches of climbing. That means that you know, halfway up, that it means it was long enough that, you know, we had to kind of stop halfway up. We both climbed up to the halfway point, and then one person started climbing again. And so it's like kind of um, is a tall climb. And in addition to it being tall, I think it was May or something. So it was early spring in Michigan. It was still snowing here. I flew
Oh,
out to Phoenix, to the desert, to Arizona. So I suddenly went from snow to hot desert, you know, jet lagged, time difference of, I think just 2 hours, but still. Um, and then, you know, we had to hike for 5 miles to get to that climb. It was a long hike through
really?
the desert the next day after I arrived in Phoenix, and then, you know,
Wow.
climb up a bunch. And so, uh,
Wow.
I think my biggest danger when climbing is often dehydration, I think, and that's why
Yes.
I had a bunch of Pedialyte I brought with me on the trip because I knew I would be really dehydrated and tired.
Gee, wow.
Yeah. Um, I'm trying to see. Let's see what other videos we have here. Hang on. Oh, I know there is like some articles I wanted to talk about that just have like best practices, because you talked about people
Hmm.
not respecting the climbs potentially.
Yeah,
Um,
although the conclusion I saw in scientific articles is that most people actually, most climbers seem to be responsible, which is good.
yeah,
Um,
definitely. And a lot of these like best practices climbing articles, they're written like by climbers for climbers, right? And so this Access Fund is a climbing organization, and this I just shared the link to this article. And in fact, I guess I can just screen share for a second and get this picture out of here.
right.
Um, so to just show the article, um, so yeah, this is, an article like 4 signs a climbing area is in trouble, and basically like there's trash around, that's bad. Um, this image here I'll share in a second, but it's about how like basically at the bottom of popular routes, just all the
Hmm.
people walking around can destroy the vegetation, which that's obviously destroying habitat for animals. Um, this is talking about erosion, another erosion from people like walking around, another example of like people walking around too much. So this is saying, oh, it's bad when you have all these exposed tree
Hmm.
roots, and what's going to happen is, the soil is just going to keep washing off as like all the roots that hold the soil in place are disturbed, and you're going to lose a lot of that hillside very quickly.
Yes.
And this is showing, spider web of trails. So there's all these little trails in here
Oh,
from people crisscrossing and walking all over and shortcutting. And this is a very popular climbing area, Joshua Tree. And
oh yes, Joshua. They were. I also saw a study on the Joshua tree. That's interesting. Yes, yes, yes.
yeah,
Very popular.
and
Yeah.
um, so
Hmm.
that's, yeah, so it's talking about, some things, even if you really are conscientious about stuff, it's actually kind of easy to accidentally contribute to these problems. They're almost like tragedy of the commons problems, where it's not that people
Yes.
don't want to do good, it's just that, collectively these little things you don't think about can add up for an area that's not supposed to be seeing that many people. So this is an example again of just like how people walking around at the bottom of this climb took away all the vegetation and stuff. David Howden has an interesting comment.
Yes, I'm just going to
So,
put that on the screen. Yeah.
oh, me too. I'll let you do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So here in the UK, there's a project to encourage climbers and fell walkers to survey for nesting ring quetzal Turdus turquatus, which nests up high. Are there similar surveys where you climb? Um, I haven't seen any like specific survey requests like that, except for the Bat Climbers for Conservation group that I shared earlier. Christian, did you come across anything?
No, I just shared one. I just shared with you all the rock climbing activity and physical habitats attributes impact avian community diversity in cliff environments. What a title! What they're actually saying is exactly what you're just talking about. So that one I came across. I found a very nice one online because David's just talking about the UK, and I will just share that with you too. This is from a fellow rock climber who is looking at different policies in different countries, which I found very interesting.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and the UK seems to be quite avid on that, whilst, as far as I understand, in the United States, it's a lot of private initiative
Hmm.
that more self monitoring really, which is very
Yeah,
interesting.
that's really interesting. I didn't look at all at
Mhm.
like the climbing in other
Mhm.
countries. Actually, I I do remember when I was climbing in Colombia, this area called Suesca. A bunch of climbers had
Mhm.
bought. This was a little bit outside of Bogota, which is the capital of Colombia, maybe just like
Yes.
a hour drive away
Mhm.
from there. There's this climbing place called Suesca, climbing and other things. And there was some people who had bought the, they'd bought a bunch of land at the base of the
Mhm.
climbs. And in addition to establishing it as a climbing area and putting up all these cliffs or these routes and stuff like that, they had started like rehabilitating the forest around there. And so, for example, there's a type of tree that's an invasive species there that I'm forgetting now what it is, but they had like been cutting down those trees and actively planting like native trees. So they were changing the forest at the base of the climb to be one that composes of native species. And my my boyfriend at the time, who I was on the climbing trip with, he was actually a Colombian botanist, and he
Oh,
was like
right.
very impressed by, he was not so much a climber. I think this is maybe like the second time I had him come climb outside, but he was very impressed by the forest, by like what the climbers had done with this forest, because he was like, oh, these are like these tree, I have not seen this tree in like so long in the wild. And like he was just like fawning over the plants. So the climbers were apparently doing a great job of restoring the habitat in that area. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah,
um,
James is asking a question I was also curious about. When you climb, does the park mention you are removing all the parts, right, when you're up there? You know, whatever you put in the rock there. Just curious if you saw anyone set that in the rock and what happens with that. Right? Hmm.
Um, I'm not entirely sure that I understand the question. I'm
No,
trying.
it's just, well, you know the big story about Mount Everest, right? It's a very famous one. It's just a big garbage dump because all
Oh
the
yeah,
climbers seem to leave everything behind, all their gear
yeah,
and so on, because all they want to get goes on top. Of course, it's now more
right.
regulated, but
Yeah. So
he's
so
asking
the
the same. You know, that's my understanding at least. You know, how is it?
yeah. So they've had initiatives like that. Someone mentioned Yosemite earlier and El Capitan. That's a case where the climbs are like big enough that it's, I think from what I understand, there's like can be like trash there. It's a
Yeah.
really, it's an area with big climbs and that's really popular, and so you can have like danger of trash accumulating and stuff like that. And so there are some like climbing action efforts where the climbers do work and like try to like have like trash removal, and they have helicopters come in and like put up like bags of trash and stuff like that. And I think, also you can hike to the top of those climbs though, so it
Mm.
can't just be climbers in that area. But yeah, Everest is, mountaineering is kind of like a little bit of a different situation because the climbs are just so much bigger. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Yeah, I know. You know, I know that the parks are getting very very strict now for astronomers. I know I'm deviating a little bit. I'm just thinking how their policy has changed, and I'm just wondering how that goes for climbers, because I used to love going to Moab. You know, Moab is, it's just wonderful national park. And at night, I used to do astrophotography there. And yeah, from one day to the next, they just said, because people were using lights to illuminate the rocks, which looks, of course,
Mhm.
very beautiful, as you can imagine. And the park didn't like it, and they just from one day to the next stopped every night activity there. So it was completely stopped, which I thought was a bit drastic, because I didn't think that these people who were doing some light painting were, at least as far as I could see, doing any harm also. But that seemed a bit of a extreme reaction. So I was wondering if something similar happens with climbing.
Yeah, I think again it's hard to say because like I think the land ownership is so spotty in a lot of areas that it's like, oh, this is national forest and this is private
Mm.
property. So yeah, I think it's highly variable, I guess, is my takeaway. um I am looking, I'm sorry, I was like dead set on trying to find some photos of this like beautiful um restored area in Colombia.
Yeah,
But
take
in
your
the
take your time. Take your time.
yeah, I'll deviate a little bit and do another wildlife
Mhm.
encounter climbing thing, I guess.
Yeah, show us. Sure.
Um, so I showed this clip earlier, but I'll show it again. So there's this route. I was climbing in Nicaragua, and this is bouldering, but there were these huge crabs climbing all over this rock. And I found a picture of a crab that looks like one of these online. I'll bring it up
You
real
look
quick.
like a spider climbing up there. I'm just in awe. It's just amazing. I
Yeah,
guess
well,
you
it's
have to
like,
be really light. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
it's in climbing. It's all about how strong you are compared to your weight. But yeah, these crabs were seriously like, I'm gonna just put you away for a minute, Christian. These
You're gonna put
crabs
me away. Don't worry.
were like this big.
Hmm.
They were really big, and they were just
Hmm.
like all over. There were so many of them on the rock, and I remember joking with my friend afterwards. I was like, "Oh, if I were to like have to name this route, I would call it constantly searching for crabs." Because you can kind of see me, like I'm always like I'm doing all this extra motion that you wouldn't normally have to do, just because I'm like looking every time I put my foot down or my hand somewhere to see, because they're also just like moving all around. So it's kind of like hard to
It's like
navigate.
Frankman said, you wear the same color as the crab. I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, I was like, please accept me into your group. Don't attack me. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna bring you back up now,
No, that's
Christian.
okay. That's fine. It's just
Yeah,
really, I thought it was a brilliant comment. Yes.
that that it is a smart observation I would not have
Mm.
made before. I didn't even think of that.
And
Coordinated.
Gentleman Ghost is
And
asking, yeah, of course, which side are you on, the Pacific or the Atlantic? Actually, which side was it?
so that was the Pacific side.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
yeah. And yeah, actually not too far, just down the beach during this trip. So this was I went for my 30th birthday to Nicaragua. This was a few years ago. And Ruman, who was in the previous climbing videos I shared, and his wife
Hmm.
Isa, who is she talks about bugs, does a bunch of live streaming on bugs. They're both like just a mile down the beach surfing. So this was a really popular surfing area. And I was like, I tried surfing one day. I was like, it's not for me. I'll just climb. I'll
Oh,
just
it's
find
funny.
some.
I did windsurfing. I loved it, but
Oh
that's
yeah.
I just. Oh my goodness, you can really go like crazy on that thing. At least you fall in the water, you know. It's much
Well,
easier.
so that's the thing though. I don't like that. I'm like the thought of like falling unexpectedly, even in the water, and then it's like I don't know. It's down there. If there's like sharp coral or something, I didn't do it. And like yeah, Issa is an amazing. Andrew from Scotland says Issa is a delight. She is a delight, and she's actually an amazing surfer. She
Great!
keeps herself
Wow.
pretty closely to talking about insects and bugs on her live stream, but she's an awesome surfer,
Is
as
that
I
so? How
witnessed.
interesting. That's
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, so this was like another, so this was another boulder a little bit farther away, but this one had no crabs on it. I think just because it was far enough from the water. So I liked that boulder better. That's the only takeaway from that. Um, yeah, I'm just scrolling through, seeing what other videos we have here. What other questions from the audience? Now is a good time for that.
There comes exactly the call from Gentleman Ghost that I was going to make. Georgia is worried about falling in water, but not from hundreds of meters cliff. That's exactly my comment.
Well, I mean, that's what I mean. It's all about like what type of what makes you afraid, and also like what types of risk management you feel comfortable with. So like
Yes.
with climbing, I decided in advance. Like when I was sitting at the top of that really tall cliff thing, I'll put it up again, I guess. Um, but like I decided in advance, like, oh, how short to tie my rope, so that like what anchor points to tie into on the rock, because there's some bolts at the top of this climb. Like there's metal sunk into the rock that I have my rope tied into, and I'm wearing a harness. So I feel like I have more control when I'm climbing. Like I decide ahead of time what the risk is going to be. I'm like,
So
okay, I'm up on
you
top.
have no fear of heights whatsoever. You could stand on a tall building on a ledge there and just look down with no problems, right?
I mean, I'm a little bit scared. When I would stand, I'm a little bit scared. So I think my partner here, I think he's less scared than I. He was like happy, just walking around up there, looking around. I was like sitting most of the time. I think I
I'd be
had my
lying, you know.
yeah. I think I had I think I had like my attachment on my harness tied tight enough that I probably wouldn't have even been able to stand up all the way right there without loosening it.
Interesting.
So I tied
Interesting.
myself in like kind of closely to the rock, and the controller for the drone, I have that like attached to my harness so that if I drop that, like it wouldn't fall very far either. Um, you asked earlier about descending, Christian.
Yeah.
So Ruman descended this route. We did something a little bit weird, where he descended this route and I stayed up on the top for a while because he wanted to do like photography with me standing on top. And actually, I haven't gotten these pictures from him, so I can't share them. But he was down there on the ground and he was like, stand up, now go closer to the edge. And I was like, okay. You know, he's like kind of like directing because to get the shot he wants. And I was like happier to just stay sitting up there. But it, you know, so I was a little bit nervous doing that, but it was still kind of like a fun nervousness. Whereas, yeah, with like falling in the water, like, I don't know. You don't know when it's going to happen and like how
Yeah, but you
how
can
you're going
only
to fall
fall.
at all.
Yeah.
I don't know. You
Well,
just have to
anyway,
keep
let's
your
not argue about that.
balance.
I'm just amazed that we have completely different ways of looking at things here, which is also good. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Frankman is saying, do you trust hooks that are already in the rock? That's a great question. I would have said the same. Have you encountered bad ones? That's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely yes. I've encountered bad ones. No, you do not necessarily trust them. And this is also part of doing your research ahead of time. You'll see things like, oh, the bolts on this route seem old, or they
Ooh.
spin around, or um, so that's part of like the research you do ahead of
Mhm.
time to try to figure stuff out. And then, you know, there's other ways you can kind of mitigate the risk as well. Like Christian, when you showed like the trad climbing video, oh, here I can put it up. So I always have we always have stuff like this with us that like we could use to add some
Mhm.
sense of security, you know, something else to catch us if we fall. There's
Mhm.
not always a good place to put it, like if there's no cracks in the rock, but you know, we try to come prepared. The thing is, you know, you can kind of assess in that moment. Like you can walk up to a climb and say, oh, these bolts seem bad, I don't want to climb it, I'm just not going to do it. Or you can climb up to a certain point and then say, oh, this particular bolt seems bad, I know that I'm going to fall to my next bolt, but like I decided that bolt looked good, so I'm fine with that. um I don't know, something about it just seems, yeah, controlled. But there is definitely a level of you're constantly kind of assessing conditions and risk as you're climbing.
Mm.
How am I going to fall?
Brenda wants to know, how long did you two stay up there? You see, everybody's fascinated with this.
um so I mean, we stayed up there for not too long. I mean, it was really hot. We're on like the top of
Is
just
that
a
right? Not
totally
windy. I would have thought it would
exposed.
be very windy, right? But
Yeah, it was windy, hot. I stayed up there quite a while because to get that for Roman's little like photography shoot. And at one point he was like, "Oh, I wonder if we waited long enough, then the shadows will change so that you'll be in shadow." And I don't know, but then he was like, "Okay, it's been too long," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm getting kind of hot up here. I think it's time to come down." But so yeah, I don't remember how long we spent up there. We did linger up there for longer than we would normally at the top of a climb, just because it was the only climb we did that day. You know, it was very tall,
Mhm.
so multiple pitches of climbing, and we had to hike a long way to get there. So, um, yeah, we kind of, you know, enjoyed the view and took our time.
Yeah, and Frankman, another question. They're all very relevant questions. How much material do you have to leave up there on the route, and what do you recollect to take further? Good
Yeah,
question. Yeah.
we love zero stuff up there.
Ah, right.
Um,
So, is that always the way you climb, or
yeah,
does it?
always.
Okay.
So the only thing that's
Hmm.
the only human sign remaining on that route when we left were the bolts. So that route is bolted. And I think you can even see, I'll play the one video again with Ruman talking, but this time I will turn him off. You can see some of the bolts and metal that are going to stay at that route after we leave, and that were there before we came.
And
Um,
how long do typical climbs take?
Oof. I think it just kind of depends on, it can, you can climb, 30 feet or whatever in, just like 5-10 minutes. If you're like, once you're all tied in, you have your harness on and everything and you're set to go. Fortunately, I don't think I can pause. You can see the chain by my knee.
Wow, look at that.
You
Oh
see,
my
I
goodness.
wish I could pause it. But you see there's like some chains and metal D-rings and stuff in the rock.
Yes,
That,
yes, yes, yes.
so yeah, that stuff was already up there. Um, and
Wow.
it's gonna stay up there after we leave. Yeah. But it's nice because then like I'm clipped, my harness is clipped into those chains right now.
Oh my
Um,
goodness, it even goes up there. You're not the highest. Wow.
yeah. So um but yeah, I think that's one of the reasons the cleanup efforts are so much easier because you bring all your rope. We don't want to leave stuff up there because our equipment is expensive. Um,
And J.J. Wall says, leave only footprints, sweat, and bolts to help others, right?
yeah. Actually, you know what? I just realized that I lied. There, we talked about traditional climbing where you put the stuff in the cracks
Mhm.
for protection. Sometimes stuff can get stuck in the
Ah,
crack. Like you get it wedged in there enough that you can't really get
yeah,
it
of
out,
course.
or
I can
maybe you
imagine.
try. Yeah, maybe you try to get it out and then it's like stuck in there.
Mm.
We did leave one piece of equipment there, which was kind of a shame. I mean, I think that thing costs like $20 or something like that, but maybe a little bit more. But hopefully it'll help the next person. Maybe they can just clip
Yeah,
it.
sure.
Yeah. So sorry, people. Some gear left in the crack there. Didn't want to leave it, but it's there for good now.
Gosh,
Yeah.
Giorgio, you certainly that's what an interesting subject, really. That's fascinating.
This is just like a generic climbing video that you added, Christian, but I see that it's one of the last things we haven't shared yet.
I
But it
just
is a
maybe want
beautiful
to add
view.
one thing, Giorgio. So
Mhm.
I mean, I did read about some very positive aspects of climbing too, and one of them was actually when DDT came about, and you probably
Mm.
know that a lot of birds, due to the DDT, the eggshells broke, and a lot of offsprings were lost, and then the book was written Silent Spring, and so on. Right, so that was a terrible time, and actually climbers did very positive things. They saved peregrine falcons and many other species of birds at that time, which was great. So yeah, so the positive sides too.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I'm gonna do another screen share actually. Wait, so speaking of the positive impacts,
Hmm.
I went to my Google Photos and I found some footage and stuff from climbing in Colombia. So
Oh wow.
I will share that again because that was the area I was talking about before, where the climbers had done a really good job of restoring some of the area at the base of the climb. And so can you see my screen now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So this is like part of the forest. This is like getting to the climb. I think this is just a very quick video. It's an accidental video loop. But yeah, this is like part of the forest getting to the climb. Um, oh yeah, they named it something. El Turpial, it looks like. I think that's what they called sort of their collective or nonprofit that's trying to restore the forest and the habitat at the base of the climb there. And so you can see it's like a really pretty little section of forest. I believe there's still some invasive trees and stuff like that in there. It's a little footpath you take to the climb. And then the climb itself, there's like a forest and then there's like railroad tracks, which you can kind of see here. And then the climbing itself, of course, I have to share, is just just gorgeous. It's just at the base of the
Oh
climb.
my goodness.
Yeah. And I mean, you can see that we kind of skimmed over this, but there's a lot of plants and stuff that grow on the cliff faces too. So there's like bromeliads and stuff growing um, on the right there. But yeah, it was a pretty cool little area. So that's one example of conservation. And oh yeah, and then I wanted to share, this was the last image I wanted to share. Climbers definitely also in the US, they kind of have come together for conservation initiatives. Like there,
Beautiful picture. Wow.
yeah, there was this area called Bears Ears. That's a popular climbing area and also really beloved by many other groups, including indigenous groups in the United States. And um, Trump, I think it was like Trump tried to like make it not a protected area. I think it's a national monument, which in the United States, like a president can designate an area as a national monument and then it's protected. And so I believe that our previous president, Donald Trump, had decided he was going to make it not a national monument. And climbers were one of the groups that really pushed strongly against that in association with others. And because they're like a group that has, you know, a collective voice and stuff like that, they can, if they decide to, they can be like pretty powerful and convincing in the areas that they say like, no, we actually want this protected. Or I think maybe he was going to, I think there was like oil there, like they wanted to do oil drilling there. And so the climbers were very against that, as you can
Well,
imagine.
thank goodness for that. I
Yeah.
can only say, gee. Yeah, some quick comments here. So Gentleman Ghost is saying, wonder if Central America's nature must be unique, very exotic. I'm thinking, well, my quick things on that, I'm thinking of hummingbirds, absolutely. Well, Georgia, you've got a lot more to add, I'm sure. So,
Oh no, definitely. I mean, when I go to those areas, it's kind of strange. Like I'm a wildlife biologist and I study animals actually here in the United States where I live. And so when I go to these exotic places, it is kind of cool because there's exotic animals that I don't know anything about. But in a way, because I don't know as much about them, I don't necessarily appreciate as much or see as much in a sense because I'm so much less knowledgeable about it. So it is good to go with other people. I like to travel with other biologists who can point things out to me and say, "Oh, this is that animal," or you know, who can point out like what the different species are and stuff, and what's a native animal or plant and what's not. Like, because I wouldn't know the difference for the most part. I'd be like, "Oh, a hummingbird," and I don't know if it's like a rare species of hummingbird or a common one. So
yeah, right, but it's so diverse. Franklin is saying, which animal encounter surprised or impressed you on climbs?
hmm. Trying to think for a moment. I think the bats in that crack were
Mhm.
probably the most surprising just because there seemed to be so many of them in there. And they were only at the very top, which I thought was funny too. They weren't anywhere lower down. But I guess it makes sense because maybe it's the top gets the most sunlight and they want to be warm or something like that. Christian, you were talking about how like the different direction that the cliffs are facing
Yes.
affects how much the wildlife uses them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly why at least I know the stories from the Alps always all the north all the north facing mountain sides were the most difficult to climb. You know, goodness me, they were so icy, they were whatever, right? Almost inaccessible. It's interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
definitely, I think it was Frankman earlier who asked about like
Mm.
the dangers of climbing on wet rock. I mean, often the rock is
Yes.
cold and
Mm.
in the shade, um, and your fingers get cold, and that really affects your climbing a lot, even if they're only a little bit cold. So yeah, managing stuff like that, like the heat and the cold
Yeah.
and wetness, and all of that is part of it, and the animals care too, right?
Oh, exactly. Well, Laura says, I never thought about the skills needed to reach certain wildlife areas. Very interesting. Oh, yes. Well, Georgia is an all-around skill. There you go.
Yeah, I have. So as like I guess as a closing statement, I will admit I have, as someone who studies wildlife and even someone who studies bats, right? I've thought about, oh, should I design like some cool research project that's gonna,
Mm.
oh, like I have to go climbing to collect this data. Oh, shucks. But I really thought about that for a while, but then I've sort of actively decided not to, at least so far, because I don't want to mix business and work to some degree.
Mm.
I mean, I love my job and I love doing research, but I also like having climbing just be something that I do just for fun. So
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I
yeah.
think it's good. Anyway, we got so many awards. I can't even count them all. The last one from David Dunn. Thank you so much. I know I don't
Oh,
want to exclude someone, but they were so generous. JJ Walsh. I'm just going to go up the list quickly, and hopefully I don't.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
mi-
definitely.
I,
We
yeah, I
appreciate
can't scroll
awards
up all
so
the way, but you
much.
got so many comments here. It's amazing. So thank you for all the kind contributions, everyone.
Yeah, it's so appreciated. I'll add a little thank you comment maybe at the end after we sign off of the broadcast, because these awards are really encouraging, and we appreciate everyone's input and feedback and comments and questions during this. Even if we didn't mention your comment, I promise I've read them and I'm like fascinated. I like hearing about your experiences and stuff, and
Yes.
the feedback is also encouraging for us to like keep doing this and keep taking a little bit of time each week to think like, oh, what are we going to talk about, and what do we think people want to hear about. So
There
it's
comes
just
another one
really
from
appreciated.
Frankman. Oh my goodness, got so many
Yeah,
awards.
yeah,
That's fantastic. Really.
yeah. Thank you. Well, to close it out, I guess I'll just answer this one last question from
Yes,
David
from
Dunn.
David Dunn. Yeah.
What's the most height you've climbed in one day? Actually, I can't answer it because I don't know. It was definitely that last picture I showed looking up from Colombia, looking up at the sort of jagged rock roof up ahead. I think that was the tallest climb I've done. I can Google real quick how tall it
Yeah, sure.
was.
That's a
I
typical
don't.
astronomer. That's an astronomer who would ask that question. How
Yeah,
high,
I
how
know.
far?
It's
Yes.
yeah. So I think it was roughly in the range of 100 meters, maybe we'll say.
Let's say it
Um,
was 5,000 meters. Yeah, that's a good one. I like it.
yeah, 5,000 meters. Yeah, I looked up that that area. The routes in that area go up to 150 meters high. This is in Suezca in Colombia, and it was like 5 pitches, and we did 3 pitches. So I'm bad at math. I don't know what to tell you.
Very
Okay, but
nice.
yeah, it's fun. Well, if there's no other questions and no other comments, I would just like to say, yeah, thank you again. It was really fun to get to share two of my passions with everyone, or three, I guess: conservation and animals and climbing. Like, what a fun, I don't know, fun, joyous thing. Fingers crossed, I actually have a climbing trip in Chile tentatively planned for next month for November. So
Wow.
maybe there'll be like a little mini update about that.
Oh, interesting. Good. Oh,
And if
Chile.
you,
Well, Chile is my favorite place for astronomy because the skies are just perfect. There's no place like Chile, really. So great.
oh,
Amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
you'll have to come too. You can come and do
You know,
photography.
don't I will. I mean, goodness me, they have 25 clear out of 30 clear skies in Chile, and they really mean the whole night. That is unheard of anywhere in the world. I'm sure David Dunn can comment on that too. But from my telescope, the most reliable observatory we have is a partner in Chile. It's just incredible. And I always wanted to go there, and then COVID came. Oh my goodness. So I'm still really, I will go. Absolutely. And I'm sure you're going to climb all the rocks there, right? It's just incredible.
Yeah, well, I mean, if things go according to plan, David, this will be my new record climb. It'll
Yes.
far surpass my previous climbing height. But again, it's like fingers crossed. You also, with COVID and stuff, you don't want to count on things, and um, you submit like your vaccine information to Chile ahead of time, and then they approve you for like entry and stuff like that. So there's also like waiting on I don't want to call it bureaucracy because that's like a negative connotation, but there's like waiting on like permissions and stuff to go through. So yeah, cool. And David, or sorry, Christian. So many Davids I was talking to. Christian, do we have a topic for next week?
Yes, we do actually. We are from Michelle Alexander. It's going to be about art, again, wildlife. So we're going to do drawing, art, and wildlife. Exactly what the topic is there, I don't know yet, but it's very exciting because it's going to be a bit different. So very
Oh,
nice to look
cool.
forward to that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, let us know what like art wildlife things you guys have in mind maybe, and they might get incorporated into next week's topic.
Yes. Good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And thanks also to our co-host, Georgia, who really ran the show today. Thank you so much for making it so interesting.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week at the same time.